If you're new to this podcast, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service connected, disabled US Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and the last 12 years of his life, I was his full time caregiver. Lance qualified for nursing home care by the time he was in his early 40s, and I needed help. I couldn't do everything by myself. He needed so much care. Over the course of 12 years, we had physical, occupational, and speech therapists, nurses, CNAs, respiratory therapists, social workers, personal trainers, caregivers, respite care providers, bath aides, and homemaker services in our home. Some were amazing, many were not. There were a lot of people who thought our life was easier because we had so many services, but it was not easy having all those people in our home all the time. It was a full-time job just managing all of the services that Lance required to keep him, I don't want to say keep him well because I did keep him healthy, but all of these things improved his quality of life. And some of them improved my quality of life as well when I was able to get respite care and get out of the house and take care of myself a little bit. But it was incredibly stressful having all those people in and out of our home all the time. We had no privacy at all, and we couldn't always trust the people that we allowed into our home.
Well, as having been one of the many people that entered your home over the years, I can remember being there and having somebody scheduled to be there right as I was leaving. Sometimes they would get there before I was finished up. You would have oftentimes a caregiver in the home assisting with other things while I was there. You would be scheduling other people for different appointments, changing appointments. And I don't think I'd ever met anyone that had so much going on inside their home. And it was kind of shocking to me. And it made me kind of anxious, honestly, because I am extremely private within my home. My home is kind of my sanctuary. I'm not an open door type person that you can just kind of, people just come in and out. My kids know that they have to ask before they invite someone over. And I'm just very, very guarded with my space. So watching you go through that was like kind of shocking, I think, because I'd never seen anything like that. And I couldn't even begin to imagine a space like that. So I was always very impressed that not only were you able to manage it, but that you even allowed it.
Well, it really was out of necessity. That is how I kept Lance strong and well enough to be able to get out and actually live life instead of just sitting at home and existing. So it was a trade off for me because I've always been a very private person. So for the last 12 years of his life, to allow strangers into our home on a regular basis was something that was really challenging for me to even think about, let alone do it. And I'm really glad that we were able to have those services because they did offer a lot. Like I said, it did make his life better. It made our life better, but it did come with a lot of problems too.
Well, I can remember just in our personal training sessions before I started coming into your home, I can remember you talking about just trying to find a caregiver that was a good fit for you guys, and so that you would have people come over, the agent, maybe the various agencies would send somebody and maybe they weren't a good fit for your situation or whatever. And just remember that being an additional thing that you had to try and manage. And that was before I ever saw it. So I was thinking, we've talked a lot about intuition and listening to your gut. Did you ever have a time when you had someone come into your house, various services? I know you had all kinds of different people come in, but Did you ever have someone come in that you just had like a really bad feeling about immediately, and just like knew this is not going to happen?
Well, yeah, there were definitely some times, and I didn't invite people into our home. When I had to interview people, I would meet them somewhere else because that's a security issue to me. I don't need people coming to my home. When you're caring for someone, you're already in a vulnerable position, and the last thing you need is everybody in the world knowing where you live and knowing that you're dealing with these issues. So if I had to interview somebody, I would meet them usually at a restaurant. We'd have lunch or something, or just have a cup of coffee, and just I would interview them at that time. But there were definitely people that I knew instantly before they even started talking sometimes that this is not going to be a good person. But there were some times that I didn't trust my instincts because I was so desperate for help. I just needed someone in there, and it turned out to be a really bad thing. And so I guess I would tell, I know that we've talked about this a lot, but if you're in a position where you need to hire caregivers for someone that you love that's vulnerable, trust your instincts. Looking back on that, there are a couple of people that I wish I would have never hired because I knew, actually, there were more than a couple, but I knew that they weren't going to be good. My gut was telling me that they weren't. But like I said, I was desperate. I was so exhausted.
Did you ever encounter people trying to label you as being too picky or too particular, and maybe criticizing that careful way that you approach those types of services?
Yes, I heard that from a lot of people. And that was actually the main reason that I didn't trust my gut. Those times when I knew that I shouldn't hire those people, I had that little voice in the back of my mind saying, "You're being too picky, RuthAnn." But you know what? When you're trying to find care for a vulnerable person, and it's someone that you love with all your heart, whether it's a child, a parent, your spouse, whoever it is, trust your gut. You're not being too picky. You are not being too picky.
I think about that when I hear these news stories, and they're just horrific. You hear about, child abuse at the hands of um, somebody that was supposed to be caring for them. You hear about elder abuse at the hands of someone who's supposed to be caring for them. And I've always wondered, did those people that hired those caregivers, did they know, did they feel something wasn't right? And oftentimes you hear that. We knew something wasn't right, but they seemed nice. They passed all the background checks, so on and so forth. I just, I don't think we can overstate how important it is to listen to that intuition and really trust that and lean into that. Curious though, what did you do in terms of hiring practices? Did you do background checks? Did you go through agencies? Like how did you try to safeguard yourself? Like what steps did you take?
So agencies do background checks. So any of the agencies that we use, they had background checks done on their people that they hired. And then if I hired, Lance was part of a veterans directed program for the last several years of his life. And I did mostly direct hire. Then I found my own caregivers through this program. They covered the background checks. So everybody that came into our home did pass a background check, but passing a background check doesn't mean that a person is a good person, because we had people steal from us. I'm sure that there were people searching for drugs. I always kept Lance's medications in a locked cabinet in a locked bedroom. There was one time that I got a text message from one of my neighbors and found out that I was very clear. And I believe that this is a HIPAA violation anyway, but nobody else was supposed to be in our home when caregivers were there. They were not allowed to even let their loved ones know where they worked. And they weren't allowed to let anyone know where they worked. Nobody was supposed to know where we lived. And this particular caregiver had invited her husband over when I was gone, and they went into one of the rooms that was off limits. It happened to be a room that wasn't locked at the time. And so after that, I ended up putting cameras in the house, and I put a keyed lock on that door so that nobody could get in there. I mean, there was such a violation from various caregivers. I did have caregivers who would show up and would either be drunk, or you could tell that they were on drugs. Someone who actually came into work one day and said that they'd been out late partying the night before and had done all these drugs. They were in Oregon. They'd gone to Oregon and were doing all these crazy drugs, which were legal there, and then showed up to work and wanted me to leave my vulnerable, disabled husband with them. Like, okay, just some of the craziest things. And it just baffles me that I was told that I was too picky when looking for help. I mean, it's like, well, you need help. Somebody offered you help. That should be good enough. It's not good enough. When you are trying to find care for somebody that you love, when you're trying to find care for anybody, it should be the best care possible, not just a warm body, which is a lot of times what we would get.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And I was very fortunate to be able to stay at home with my kids while I was raising them. So I never really had to do childcare per se. I would occasionally hire a babysitter, but even at that, it was just a handful of times. And I can't even imagine. I watch parents go through that, just kind of the stress of to determine whether or not this caregiver is going to be safe for the most important person in your life. That is such a huge responsibility and even a burden, I would say. So I can't even imagine with a disabled spouse and somebody who is as vulnerable as Lance. And in many ways, he was just as vulnerable as a very, very small child. So it's the same thing. As we're talking about just the topic of having people in your home, making those determinations, when, how, just the logistics of it, do you have any advice for kind of how that timeline would progress? Do you introduce one caregiver? Do you do multiple? When did you decide to stop taking him to appointments and instead have people come into the home? Was it kind of a progression, or was it at all at once? Now let's start scheduling these appointments in home. How did that work out for you guys? And what advice would you give to others that are maybe starting on that journey?
For Lance, it was a progression. So we started off with just respite care because he was 39 years old. I was 37 when he was already showing signs of cognitive decline and memory loss. And he was having some behavior problems, and he had a lot of anxiety, and I couldn't leave him alone. And to have quit my job to stay at home and take care of my husband at the age of 37 and to be with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it was a lot. And it was incredibly stressful. It was something that I wasn't prepared for at all. So I started off with respite care, and I didn't have it very often. Maybe every 2 weeks, I would have a respite care provider come to the home, and they would spend 6 hours with Lance. And that was so good for him because he was able to socialize with someone else. He was still getting around at that time, so they could go walking in the neighborhood. They would play games, they would do crafts, have conversations, listen to music, bake cookies. There were all kinds of things that he was still able to do. And it gave me a break so that I could go do something for myself. And then he ended up having some major seizures, and that changed everything. That was a couple of years into my caring for him. And after that, every time he had a hospitalization, if he was in the hospital for a long time, then he might need those services, the physical therapy. Usually, I guess it was just physical therapy at the time. Sometimes it was occupational therapy, but those services just came along as he needed them. It wasn't constant, but he was in and out of the hospital a lot for the last 10 years of his life. And so there were periods of time where he did need more services than others. So that's something that you really need to work out with the primary care provider. If you feel like you need help, then I would say you probably need help. And just getting somebody in the house to help me with Lance, just to spend time with Lance in the beginning, that was enough. That was all I needed. I was still able to manage the household on my own. But as his disease progressed, I really needed help with food prep and cleaning and also spending time with Lance. So it changed a lot throughout the years.
I can only like think of this through the lens of a parent caring for small children. So I know that some people struggle with maybe some kind of guilt over hiring someone to come in and spend time with their loved ones. I know I've heard moms talk about things like having a nanny or uh, help around the house, and maybe feeling guilty over that, and or maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. There's a lot of emotion that can come along with that. So is that something that you experience, just maybe feelings of guilt or feelings of insufficiency or doubting yourself, or were you pretty well aware of whether or not that was the best option for Lance and just that you were doing things based on what was best for him? I'm just curious about maybe the emotional kind of uh, clarity there, if you were able to walk forward with confidence, or if you had some hesitancy based on the emotion tied to it.
No, there was never any hesitancy with my emotions. I've talked before about Lance's first diagnosis, which was 15 months after we got married, and it was very serious. He had major surgery. He wasn't able to walk for 3 months, and I had to drive him everywhere. I had to assist him with a lot of things. And I learned then, I was 23 years old. I learned then that I needed to take a break. I needed to care for myself, or I wasn't going to be able to continue caring for him. And so by the time he received his second diagnosis, I was already in the habit of taking time for self care because he was sick most of the years that we were together. So I never felt guilty that I needed to leave. Sometimes I felt guilty about the people that I had to leave him with because I didn't always like the people that I left him with. They weren't always great people. They didn't always have his best interests at heart. And but like I've said, I was burned out. I was in a bind often and just needed somebody there. And I also had the voices in the back of my mind, you're being too picky, RuthAnn. So I would like to encourage people to stop telling others that they're being too picky when they're trying to find somebody to care for someone that they love, because you can never be too careful.
I think that's a really good point. And I would also encourage anyone out there that, I can only come from the position of a parent, but you cannot be too careful. Like, you only get one shot at this. So make sure that you are at peace with it. And I would say if you are caring for a disabled loved one, same thing. Like, you don't get a do-over on it. So you need to be perfectly at peace with whatever you choose. Listen to that intuition and really trust that. Because if you genuinely have that person's best interest in mind, you you will find someone that aligns with that. Don't get worn out in the search. Just know that it will happen. You'll find what you need, but don't settle. Don't settle. It's too important.
Well, I hope that this has been helpful for people. And thanks so much for joining me, Jenna. I will see you next time.
All righty, we'll see you. Bye.